Today is a solemn and significant day. With today's guilty plea, Mr. Mangione has accepted full responsibility for the death of Brian Thompson.
Breaking news out of federal court in Manhattan. Accused assassin Luigi Mangione enters guilty pleas to charges related to the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was deliberate, calculated, and premeditated.
The crime that shocked the nation and robbed a family of a husband and father. We're at federal court with all of the details. I'm Angenette Levy, and this is Crime Fix. Nearly 2 years after a masked man wearing all black pulled out a gun on West 54th Street outside of the Hilton Hotel and shot the CEO of the nation's largest health insurance company, the man accused of committing the crime, Luigi Mangione, has now pleaded guilty to charges in the federal indictment, and he admits that he stalked and killed Brian Thompson. Cameras were not allowed inside the courtroom when all of this went down, so to help us understand exactly what happened, we have Law&Crime's Elizabeth Millner, who was just feet away from Luigi Mangione when he pleaded guilty. Elizabeth, you were in the courtroom. Take us inside and take it from the very top about what you saw. I read online that Luigi Mangione came into the courtroom and he was not handcuffed.
No, Angenette, he was not handcuffed. Actually, it's funny enough that you say that because when he first came inside the courtroom, his hands were actually behind his back. So I at first assumed he was handcuffed from the back, but then as he's kind of approaching the defense's table, we see that that's not the case. But we do believe that he was shackled around his feet, especially given the way that he was walking, kind of posturing himself as he walked over to the defense table. So Angenette, today was a very interesting hearing. I think a lot of us were highly anticipating that there was going to possibly be that guilty plea. And now that we have the confirmation that that officially happened, I think a lot of people are still trying to kind of find the words about how they're all feeling about this. So when Luigi Mangione first came into the courtroom today, he, at least from what I could tell, because this is my very first time seeing him inside the courtroom, he seemed like he, I can't even like put the words together for it, but it seemed like a lot was on his mind. It seemed kind of like a weight coming into the courtroom. It felt a little bit tense because Brian Thompson's family was also inside that courtroom today. This is the first time that we are seeing them. They traveled across state lines, we believe, in order to get to the courthouse today. So we knew that it was going to be something big that was going to be happening. But as we all know now, it was going to be that guilty plea in which he pleaded guilty to his 2 counts in the indictment in the federal case. As far as the state's case go, we know that the defense has filed a motion to dismiss those charges. But as far as the federal case goes, the judge did accept that guilty plea, and so we'll see in terms of sentencing what that sentence could actually look like.
And I think we need to be very clear with the viewers here. This was not a plea deal. Mm-hmm. There was no plea agreement. Luigi Mangione walked into court and he pleaded guilty to the 2 interstate stalking charges in the indictment. And those 2 charges basically state that he traveled through interstate commerce across state lines, that he stalked Brian Thompson and then was responsible for his death. You mentioned that Brian Thompson's family was in the courtroom. Talk to me about what you observed from Brian Thompson's family.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first came into the courtroom, us being the media, we all came in first. And then as we're getting closer to the hearing time, it was set for 11 a.m. Eastern time. We see this family come in. And at first we're all whispering to each other. We're like, is that Brian Thompson's family? Is that the family? Then we got confirmation it was the family because we did see Brian Thompson's wife inside that courtroom, or excuse me, Brian Thompson's widow inside that courtroom. So it was pretty interesting to kind of see how their reaction was to seeing Luigi Mangione inside the courtroom too. He's in a khaki jumpsuit. The minute he comes into the courtroom, I see one of the family members kind of grab another family member, kind of like holding them a little bit tight on the shoulder. And I don't know if it was just the anticipation of seeing Brian Thompson's now confessed killer inside that courtroom or what it was. But even in terms of when Luigi Mangione was speaking about the crime itself, we saw Brian Thompson's widow start to dry away some tears that were coming. I can only imagine how emotional it was to just hear him talk about it just so stoically in a way. But for the most part, there wasn't an outward kind of emotion expressed, but more so you could feel that all the family was very tight knit together. It was probably very jarring for them to see Luigi Mangione in the flesh, but for some of them, of course, they couldn't control their emotions in terms of just the tears that were falling, especially after seeing Luigi speak about the crime itself.
No doubt, no doubt. And let's turn now to what Luigi Mangione said. The judge went through, as any judge would, Judge Garnett, whether or not Luigi Mangione was clear-headed, whether or not he understood his rights, whether he was waiving his rights. And then the judge required Luigi Mangione to allocute and say what he did.
And it was interesting, Angenette, because, as the judge is reading off just, these questions on whether or not he's of sound mind, there was this moment where he's answering yes repeatedly, but then he's asked whether or not he recently had drugs or alcohol. And he takes kind of a moment. He looks at both of the Agnifilos who are sitting right beside each other. And then he kind of blurts out that he had taken sleeping pills about 2 days ago. And I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit. But from what the judge saw as far as his demeanor goes, she did think that he was of sound mind. It was interesting, Angenette, too, to see him kind of, again, talk about the crime where he was reading from a script. So it wasn't a situation where he was speaking with a lot of emotion. He was just kind of reading it as if it was maybe an essay in college, that type of sort, but just very kind of, like I had mentioned before, just stoically talking about the crime. He stayed seated the entire time. He took pauses as he's reading this out, but he goes into, after how years of enduring pain in his back, that he was just getting frustrated with the entire healthcare system. And so he knew that UnitedHealthcare was holding an investor conference. And one thing I found very eye-opening was that he posed as an investor with the firm, saying that he had $50 billion worth of money to invest. And he made this kind of quip, Angenette, about how they were quick to respond to him with the information that he would need in order to track down where this investor conference was taking place, at what time. He said he got a faster response than when he ever did a claim with insurance. And I thought that was kind of an interesting quip that he had made throughout this whole thing, because that's been the whole defense's theory, right, is that he did this, or that's been what we've been hearing as far as his motivation behind it, that he had been enduring years of pain and things of that sort. So he had posed as an investor. He received that immediate response, made a gun from a 3D printer, traveled to New York City, and he said that he had intentions to shoot Brian Thompson. He admitted that plain out in court, and that was kind of the moment we started to see his wife get a little emotional. His family is kind of looking at him as he's reading this, and you can't help but think that they have to feel this type of anger, possibly this hatred, as he's just callously talking about the crime. And so in terms of just his speech, it didn't take too long. He really just stopped after the shooting, and then it just ended from there.
Elizabeth, Luigi Mangione, in a direct quote from the courtroom, wrapped up his statement by saying, "I knew what I was doing." So he made it very clear that this was premeditated, that he made the ghost gun, the 3D gun. He made it himself, that he communicated by email with the investor relations department at UnitedHealthcare. So that was a key part of this proceeding today, because the judge wanted to ensure that he was doing this voluntarily and that he was competent to make this decision.
And it seems like he was very confident in him making this decision, because I know a lot for his staunch supporters, especially. There have been some who have been like, he didn't do it. There's no way. The government has, they're not necessarily making up evidence, but they were alleging that the government just had a, overzealous case against Luigi Mangione. So to hear him say out of his mouth, inside the courtroom, in front of Brian Thompson's family, in front of all the members of the press, in front of even some of those staunch supporters that he had, that, I did this, I knew what I was doing was wrong. I'm sure a lot of those who were still hoping onto that little inkling of his innocence and his complete innocence might have been disappointed to hear him say that he did it and that he accepts responsibility, whatever that punishment may ultimately be.
And you're right about that. Let's dig into that a little bit, because a lot of people, he does have a lot of supporters. And we see the social media support for him. We've actually interviewed some of the supporters in the past. Some people think that he was a patsy for this, while others believe that he was justified in doing this to send a message about corporate greed and the health insurance, the healthcare industry. So talk to me a little bit about that aspect of this and whether or not you are seeing those supporters outside the federal courthouse today.
Well, Angenette, I was really surprised not to see a big gaggle of Luigi girls, Luigi fans just waiting in line to get into the hearing. When I first came in this morning at 7 o'clock, there was a long line, but it was mainly of press. A lot of people anticipating whether or not he was going to plead guilty, whether or not he was going to allocute in court today. But as far as those fans who show up in their Luigi outfits with the trucks and the signs, like there were not as many as you would expect. And it might also be because that this hearing was very last minute. We just heard about it just a few days ago. We all had a scramble to get here, even media-wise. So I'm sure some of his supporters who were, maybe outside of the state or had to travel from a distance, that they weren't able to be here today. But it was interesting because I was overhearing one of his main supporters who was inside that courtroom kind of talk about how this was always a possibility, how she knew that this could be a huge possibility even when he was first accused of these crimes. But it is interesting to see some people, even after the allocution, still say and still believe that Luigi Mangione is innocent, even after he spoke out in court, where we've seen other defendants who choose not to speak during allocutions. But Luigi said today in court that he did it, that he's responsible. And again, we have to wait to see what that ultimate punishment will be. But he said out in court today that he was the one, he was the guy that did it.
And there are a lot of people for whom Luigi Mangione is a hero, is a Robin Hood type figure. But then on the other side of the courtroom, we, of course, have the government saying that they will pursue life in prison without parole for Luigi Mangione. There was a press conference, and we're going to get to that very shortly and play that for the viewers, where they said they will seek, the U.S. Attorney James McDonald said he will seek the harshest punishment possible. So there will be a sentencing in this case, and the defense is going to have to try to put on some evidence to show mitigation here, including Luigi Mangione's mental state potentially, and those years that he spent dealing with back pain that he referenced in his statement.
Yeah, the years of the back pain, we know that that's going to be at the forefront of the defense's argument. But even just kind of going back to the government's argument and all the evidence they had, they're saying that they had security cam video. That they all were planning to present this information at trial. I thought there was one interesting tidbit that that prosecutor said in court today, was that they have videos showing Brian Thompson turning around as Luigi is allegedly about to fire that second shot. So it seems like from the government standpoint, they saw that moment that Brian Thompson turned around, saw his killer, and then, inevitably the next shot came, and eventually, unfortunately, Brian Thompson had passed away. But in terms of just all the evidence that the government had, they had a 9mm pistol that was found on Luigi when he was arrested in Altoona. They had the notebook on his possession, the defendant using his cell phone, eyewitness testimony. And so it seems like from the government side of things that they have all this concrete physical evidence. So it'll be interesting to hear what the defense's mitigating factors are going to be and what they're going to say outside of that he had suffered years of back pain and injury, because just as they're saying that, another, on the other side, the government can argue, well, lots of people experience this type of pain and injury. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go out and kill or murder anybody. And so it'll be interesting to see what the defense's perspective will be once they present those mitigating factors in court.
And the judge made it very clear that she is bound by nothing here. So it will be totally up to this judge, Garnett, to come up with the sentence after hearing everything on December 18th from both the government and the defense.
Yeah, and the government is only asking in their letter, as far as sentencing recommendations, 292 months to 365 months in prison for as in terms of punishment. So just doing some quick math, that's what, in the 25 to 30-year range. And now that the defense is trying to throw out the state charges, it seems like even though it's at the judge's discretion, she can definitely send Luigi Mangione to have a longer sentence. But in terms of the possibilities, it seems like maybe instead of a life sentence, a life sentence without the possibility of parole, that there might still be that possibility he only gets 25, 30 years. This coming from a man who's still in his kind of late 20s. We'll see what happens. But again, the judge isn't bound by the prosecution's recommendations. She has total discretion to possibly send him to the max term, which would be life in prison without parole.
No doubt. And in the federal system, you only have to do 85% of the prison sentence, and then you can be released. So it will be very interesting to see how all of this turns out on that sentencing date on December 18th. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for taking us inside the courtroom where cameras were not allowed. We so appreciate it.
Thanks, Angenette.
Now, you heard Elizabeth say that Brian Thompson's family was in court for the guilty plea. In a statement, the family said, "Today's guilty plea marks an important step toward justice for Brian and for our family. While nothing will ease the pain of losing him, we are grateful that the federal justice system has held the person responsible for this heinous act accountable. Now we look to the court to ensure that sentencing reflects the severity of this crime. We remain mindful that additional proceedings in New York and Pennsylvania are still to come, and we will continue to seek the justice Brian deserves." Now, despite the guilty plea in federal court, Mangione still faces murder charges in New York State Court related to Brian Thompson's execution-style killing. Those charges include the second-degree murder count, criminal possession of a weapon with a silencer, criminal possession of a weapon for a loaded firearm, criminal possession of a forged instrument for the ammo clip, criminal possession of a weapon for the ghost gun, criminal possession of a weapon, and many more. But Mangione's legal team is hoping that his guilty plea in federal court will essentially torpedo the state's case because of New York's tough statute on double jeopardy. Here's Karen Friedman-Agnifilo.
Today is a solemn and significant day. With today's guilty plea, Mr. Mangione has accepted full responsibility for the death of Brian Thompson, arising from the events of December 4th, 2024, outside of the UnitedHealthcare Investor Conference here in Midtown Manhattan. It was a single tragic event, yet he's being prosecuted twice for the same conduct. As Luigi explained in court today, he endured years of severe, debilitating pain following a broken back while struggling to navigate our healthcare and health insurance systems. Like the thousands of people who have reached out since this tragedy to share their own experiences, he believed that the system had failed him and destroyed his life. Despite this being a single isolated event, Mr. Mangione has been unfairly treated since the outset in every way and has successfully fought off terrorism charges and the death penalty, while also fighting at the same time two simultaneous prosecutions in two jurisdictions who are trying to punish him twice for the exact conduct. He's been treated differently from every other defendant charged with this offense in New York. However, thankfully, New York law does not allow this. New York law does not permit a person to be prosecuted and punished twice for the exact same crime under a statute that governs successive prosecutions. It's also known as the double jeopardy law. Today's guilty plea triggers this statute, and we just filed our motion in state court explaining why the state charges must be dismissed under New York's double jeopardy protections. We will not be taking any other questions.
Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is not rolling over on this. In a statement, a spokesperson wrote, "Since December 2024, the Manhattan DA's office has been tirelessly preparing to pursue a trial conviction in New York State Supreme Court for the alleged cold-blooded murder of Brian Thompson. We are encouraged that Mr. Thompson's family received a measure of accountability today. While federal sentencing is pending, we are prepared to litigate the defense motions. The Manhattan DA's office remains committed to seeking justice for Mr. Thompson and his family. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jamie McDonald, says he will ask that Luigi Mangione spend the rest of his life behind bars.
Luigi Mangione stalked and murdered Brian Thompson in cold blood on a public sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan. Just a few moments ago, Mangione pled guilty to his heinous act. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was deliberate, calculated, and premeditated. In the days leading up to the murder, the defendant very carefully prepared for the attack. He tracked Mr. Thompson's whereabouts, conducted surveillance along the route he knew Mr. Thompson would take, and positioned himself to carry out the plan. Then, on a sidewalk on West 54th Street, the defendant murdered Mr. Thompson, shooting him from behind with a 9mm handgun equipped with a silencer. He shot Thompson twice at close range. The second shot came as Mr. Thompson turned and faced the defendant. The defendant did this as everyday New Yorkers walked nearby, and while the rest of the city woke up to start their day. Mangione then ran away, leaving Mr. Thompson to die. The defendant committed this murder in an attempt to draw public attention to his dislike of certain businesses. But we live in a civilized society governed by the rule of law. We debate, we disagree, we protest. We do not commit murder. No grievance, political belief, or ideological cause can ever justify murder. There can be no celebrity in assassination. Any person who celebrates, encourages, or excuses actions like these is fundamentally wrong. Mangione attempted to send a public message through violence, but the message that emerges today is very different. Violence is not a legitimate instrument to promote any political or social message. And those who resort to violence in an effort to advance their beliefs will be prosecuted, convicted, and put in jail. Today, the Southern District of New York, together with our law enforcement partners, writes the final chapter of Mangione's federal prosecution. Now, he stands convicted in federal court and faces life in prison. One other point that's important to note. While the defendant pled guilty, our office does not have a plea agreement with him. Instead, he pled open, which means he pled guilty to all pending counts in the indictment. There are no accommodations or concessions, and we are free to seek the maximum penalty under the law. I'd like to thank the dedicated prosecutors of our office's Violent Organizations and Crime Unit, who are beside me, for their remarkable efforts to bring this case. I would also like to thank the NYPD and the FBI, whose tireless and incredibly sophisticated investigative efforts made this conviction possible. Finally, I want to express on behalf of all of us here our deepest sympathy and compassion for the many family members and friends of Brian Thompson. Mr. Thompson's family and many of his friends were in court for the guilty plea today. I know they will have an opportunity to be heard at sentencing. We all stand in awe of their love for their family and for their friend, and their unwavering commitment to seeing justice done in this case. We hope they can take some solace in the fact that from the beginning, we have brought the full force of the federal government to bear in this case. In this prosecution, we have consistently pursued the maximum penalties under the law as necessary and just punishment for these crimes. The result achieved today now allows our office to seek the maximum penalty allowed, life imprisonment, which, as I've conveyed to Mr. Thompson's family, is what we intend to seek.
And the commissioner of the NYPD, Jessica Tisch, spoke about the investigation and the crime.
Luigi Mangione pleaded guilty in connection with the murder of Brian Thompson on a Midtown Manhattan sidewalk in December of 2024. This is an important moment of accountability, and my thoughts remain first and foremost with Mr. Thompson's family and everyone who knew and loved him. But I also want to take a few minutes today to recognize the extraordinary police work that brought us here. From the moment that Mr. Thompson was assassinated on the morning of December 4th, the NYPD mobilized an enormous investigative effort. Our detectives combed through thousands of hours of surveillance video, followed up on hundreds of tips, and worked through an extraordinary volume of forensic and digital evidence. They used some of the most sophisticated technology available to law enforcement, and they paired it with the kind of painstaking, old-fashioned detective work that has defined the New York City Police Department for generations, interviewing witnesses, canvassing neighborhoods, retracing the suspects' movements, and pursuing every viable lead. Most importantly, they developed a clear image of the man we were looking for and got that image out to the public and to law enforcement agencies across this country 5 days after the murder. That work paid off in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where an alert member of the public recognized Mangione and local police took him into custody. That was not simply a lucky break. It was the culmination of 5 days of relentless investigative work that gave the public the information it needed to recognize the suspect and gave our law enforcement partners what they needed to act. This case began with the worst kind of violence on our streets. It was answered by the very best of the New York City Police Department. To every member of the NYPD who played a role in this investigation, you should be enormously proud for bringing us to this day. And to those who idolize Luigi Mangione, I say this: violence is not a cause, murder is not a message, and a killer is certainly not a hero.
If you love digging into the details of these big crime cases as much as I do, you must download the Law&Crime Plus app. If you haven't checked it out yet, here are 3 reasons to jump on board today. Number 1, you get complete access. Watch the best shows from both Law&Crime and Court TV completely ad-free. Number 2, the case files. Get deep dive access to raw trial evidence, including body camera video, 911 calls, crime scene photos, and much more. And finally, it's free for 30 days. We are giving all of our viewers a full month to test it out completely risk-free. So head on over to lawandcrimeplus.com, enter the promo code CRIMEFIX, and start exploring today. Luigi Mangione is scheduled to be back in court in September for his trial on those state charges, if not before then, as his attorneys argue to throw out the state's case. We, of course, will stay on top of this and let you know exactly what happens. And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.